Welcome back to Analysis. The residents of James Turner Street in Birmingham have become the subject of national interest after close to 5 million people tuned in to the Channel 4 series Benefit Street this week. The ferocity of the debate that followed has shone a light on attitudes towards Britain's welfare system. As the government continues to shrink the welfare budget, is it time to address a system in crisis? And how do you decide who gets what anyway? Well, Raoul, just let me ask you about the reaction to that, because some of the people who were actually interviewed in the street said, we've been misrepresented here, we were mugged, really. You're a filmmaker. How would you feel if people that you'd interviewed came back to you and said this?
Well, I think that's a betrayal of trust, really. I think you have a responsibility as a filmmaker to inform all the participants and anything that you create exactly what the film's going to be about. And, you know, according to a number of the people in this show, that didn't happen. They were lied to. Unfortunately, that's not particularly unusual in TV. It happens a lot. And I think a lot of modern documentaries that we see on TV are essentially freak shows, and the way we get people to participate is simply to deceive them, and that's happening again and again.
Your film Lottery of Birth, I mean, it's been a fantastic success, but it took almost a diametrically the opposite attitude to Benefit Street, didn't it? Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you approached the
Sure.
issue?
Yeah. Well, the idea of the Lottery of Birth is that we come into the world really not in control of many aspects that dominate our identity. So we inherit genes that we didn't choose, and we encounter an environment, a culture that we didn't choose. And so much about who we become and the lives that we lead and the opportunities that we have no control over. So actually, when you look at it that way, the very idea that we can blame people for the poverty or the difficulties that they face, or even give credit to the people who do well in society, it begins to break down. In fact, everything we know about human development, from neuroscience to experimental psychology, tells us the exact opposite, that essentially the very notion of people deserving this or deserving that doesn't really make sense. And when you look at the welfare state in that light, I think it's really rectifying what is a fundamental imbalance and injustice in our system, that some people have every privilege and do very well, and other people have to struggle from the start.
Well, let me ask Adam about it, because that kind of essential sympathy for the people that you're portraying, that just didn't exist in this programme, did it? And it didn't start off with a frame of mind, which it could have done, to say these people are in incredibly difficult circumstances, and it's a miracle they're doing half as well as they are.
Well, I think there are some aspects which were very sympathetic, actually. I think recently in one of the episodes that showed the conditions of Romanian workers who were essentially used as slave labour. It shows the difficulties that people face when they're facing their housing eviction. It showed problems with drug addiction and alcohol addictions. These are real issues which affect lots of people. But I think it's slightly concerning that we say that we have no control over our lives. That could lead us down to a very, very dangerous path. In fact, many people do have control. Most people do have control over their lives. If you work hard and you prepare for an exam, you do well, that's your responsibility and that's your achievement. And I think there is a danger sometimes that we say everything is beyond our control, this is all society's problems. And sometimes there are problems in terms of there are structural inequalities in our education system which prevent many people achieving their potential. There are problems in terms of our workforce and people able to get the skills level that they can achieve the potential as well. So there are problems, but mostly we can work hard and we do achieve, and lots of people do that.
Yeah, can I come back to that?
Well, let me just bring Steve in, because I mean there's two very different views here. There's a view which, if you don't mind me perhaps caricaturing it a little, is every boy can be president, and if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, basically, it's down to you. And there's one which has those very big institutional barriers in the way of certainly people from disadvantaged backgrounds doing this. Now, Class is a think tank which is examining those questions. So what would you say are the barriers to people who are coming from the kind of backgrounds that the Benefit Street people are coming from?
One of the distortions of Benefit Street is, in fact, that there is this layer at the bottom of society that is ultra deprived. It's in a really bad way. The reality is that working class people who constitute a large proportion of this country are in and out of poverty, depending on jobs, depending on employment. Beveridge, who set up the welfare state, said that the biggest obstacle to decent living standards was unemployment, mass unemployment. And one of the problems today is that we do have mass unemployment, 2.5 million unemployed and 1.5 million who would like to work more full-time. So that's one of the biggest barriers, just employment and the nature of the economy. But Class is
what about the changing nature of work? Because a lot of people say, look, in previous recessions, mass unemployment was more of what happened. In this recession, it's more of casualised labour, short-term, zero-hour contracts, poverty pay.
Well, the number of people, as I say, is 1.5 million who want more hours. And I think that's a separation we've had under neoliberalism since the early 80s, and partly because of the decline of trade unions that have been able to increase ordinary working people's pay. Because of the decline of trade unions, you've got a massive shift from workers' pay to profits. And one of the consequences of that is that you've had the flexibility, deregulation of work that has made it much more difficult to get long-term jobs. And of course, that's bad for the economy, because long-term jobs are more productive jobs that deliver higher productivity and higher growth for the economy, within which we can get benefit. So it's a real problem, this atomised society that we're in today.
Raoul, what do you say to the point that I think Adam was making, that kind of on the view that you were saying at the beginning of this half of the programme, it kind of excludes the possibility of people doing something for themselves?
Let me come back to that. I mean, if we look at the issue seriously about responsibility and what we can take credit for in our lives, the first thing we find is there is no empirical support whatsoever for the idea that we can take credit ultimately for our achievements or failures in life. Of course, we all make choices, but we make choices with a brain that we didn't choose, that we understand very little about. Now, it's not something that's generally discussed, but in a scientific literature, it's almost taken for granted that this is how we work. And I think once you bring that perspective, that empirical scientific perspective, and you shine that light on these kind of issues, then things look very different. And what people receive from the state shouldn't be construed as benefits. It should be construed as rectifying an inherent imbalance of privilege that exists in our society. I think that's my point.
I mean, what's wrong with the old notion of benefit, that out of general taxation, which is something that the entire population pays into for its working life, it's entitled in moments of need to sustenance?
Oh, that's certainly the case. I mean, it's important that our wealth system looks after those who are facing severe problems. It's important that we look after those who perhaps maybe have some medical problems. It's important that we look after those people. The problem is that we've gone from that system, seeing that there also happen to be so many other people in poverty as well, and said, okay, here's some money. But poverty plus £1 doesn't solve the problem. Equally, in terms of worklessness, it is the case, of course, that there are many people who want to work more, but we've had 3.9 million workless households in 2010, but that's fallen. So there are more people in employment now than there have ever been. But the issue, and you talk about the unemployment rate, 2.39 million people who are unemployed, which is a catastrophe, which is still too high. But an even greater problem than that is the fact that only 58.8% of people of working age are actually working. We have 8 million people, so many people who are not in the labour market to begin with, because they've either given up or haven't been able to enter it in the first place, who are simply not able to work or not working at all. That's a major problem. That is the cause of so many of the social and economic problems. And unless we start to say, actually, focus on the specific issues, why they are not able to find jobs, why is it not rational for them to find jobs, why are we not able to encourage businesses to take them on, and talk about bankers' bonuses and all these other peripheral issues, then we won't begin to solve some of these endemic issues.
Steve?
Well, first of all, you're beginning to perpetrate the myth of people who are workless and never work. All the statistics show that's hardly there at all. And the intergenerational, where the parents didn't work and then the kids don't work, that doesn't exist. But that's again and again talked about. The reality is that since the bankers' crisis brought about by the bankers who had massive bonuses, unemployment has massively increased. It didn't increase because there was an increase in fecklessness, or increase because people didn't want to work, or there's all these problems at the bottom of society, people who are benefits traps and all that. It increased because jobs shut down, because the system closed workplaces and there were no more jobs. And 1 million lost their jobs, another 1.5 million went on short-time working. That's why unemployment increased, for no other reason. And getting that sorted, ending mass unemployment, is the absolutely critical lever that will reduce welfare spending, that I want to do in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that? I mean, you know, we all remember when this happened. You know, surely Steve's got a point, hasn't he? There wasn't some sort of outbreak of, you know, work shy behaviour suddenly in 2007, 2008. I mean, we all remember it. The car plant in Swindon just closed down for 12 months. The deal in Nissan in Sunderland was that they had to accept less pay, and they did. So I mean, it's not quite that there's this sort of, you know, work shy, you know, group of people who suddenly multiplied several thousandfold, is it?
Of course, and there was a serious, I think, sort of from pre-crisis 1.5 million unemployed to now to 2.5 million at the after that, and so that's a serious problem. But nobody's saying that there's suddenly an outbreak of work shyness. That suddenly people just don't want to work. That's clearly not the case. I mean, otherwise we really would have serious problems. But that isn't the case. It's the fact that for many people it's simply not worth working, and that was before the crisis and after the crisis. Before the crisis, youth unemployment was rising, even when we had a boom time. Sort of strong economic growth, youth unemployment was rising. Before the crisis, we still had so many millions of people on incapacity benefits, so not unemployed, people who were just simply outside of the labour market. That was before the crisis, and it exists now and has been exacerbated by the financial crisis and by the economic crisis.
That demeans millions of people who have got serious illnesses, mentally ill people,
but
people with real disabilities who are unable to work, and unfortunately employers won't give them the support to get back to work.
Just you know, there's a lot of statistics being thrown around. We've done a little bit of work and come up with some of our own. So let's just have a look at this. As the cuts bite harder in Britain, there's an argument that too many people are claiming benefits, and we've heard it here. But the latest figures from the Department of Work and Pensions show that over £10 billion of benefits go unclaimed every year. Of these, some £2 billion are made up of unclaimed income support, £3.1 billion in housing benefit, £1.95 billion in job seekers allowance, £2.4 billion in council tax benefit, and £2.8 billion in pension credits. And you can see on your screens now, I hope, that display which illustrates that. Now, I guess one of the things that's just worth discussing here is that if there's this much that's being unclaimed, in other words, that people are entitled to, but they're not claiming, isn't that as much something that we should be worried about in the benefit system as anything else? Well,
I think if you look at looking at the pure size of the welfare budget is in itself not actually that useful. It's you know, we have a large deficit and savings need to be made. But more importantly, for the specific issue of people on low pay, people without jobs, is the reform of the system, is making it more worthwhile for people to move out of joblessness or move out of low pay and low hours into higher pay and higher hours. The reform system, tinkering with the tax system, which is what we're doing so far, but we really need more radical changes to make the difference between worklessness and working much greater, to encourage businesses to hire people much more.
Two ways you can do that: increase pay or reduce benefits.
Well, increasing pay would be a brilliant way of doing it. Actually, I mean, but what is pay? Is actually what's more important is disposable income. So. Disposable income, of course, depends on how much income tax you pay, how much national insurance you pay, but also people who simply can't afford to get to work because of petrol prices so high. So and fares going up. Yes, you take action to increase, to reduce fuel duties.
So you have a redistributive tax system that taxes the rich, taxes people earning over 40, 50,000, 60,000 pounds, taxes bankers' bonuses, and takes it off the working poor. But you agree with that, would you? Redistributive tax system.
Well, obviously we have some element of redistribution of our tax system, but actually, what's so frustrating is that the solution to all our problems isn't suddenly sort of magically creating these huge volumes of revenue coming from very rich people. Clearly, we want to tax very rich people, and we do. In fact, the richest 1% are paying more now than they ever did under the Labour government, which is something which is forgotten. But what needs to be what we're focusing on, the people on lower incomes, is making it easier for them to get to work, reduce fuel duty. So yes, everyone pays fuel duty, but it has a disproportionate impact on the poor. So if you reduce fuel duty, that's a progressive tax system. So that's redistributive. So yes, that's a good thing.
And reduce fares. They've just gone up.
So we should try to increase competition in transport. So make sure transport trains, for example, there should be much greater competition there, and that should bear down on prices. We should be investing much more in our energy sector to reduce prices that way.
Raoul, what do you make of just to take us back to those figures for a moment? The way that those figures, I mean, they're quite striking. £10 billion unclaimed. Yeah. You'd be hard put to find those in the press. You know, there aren't. I mean, what would be a comparable TV program to Benefit Street which focused on that? That you were wandering down the streets.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, or simply going down an ordinary street saying, "Did you know you were entitled to this?" People say, "No, I didn't know I'm entitled to this. I'm not claiming it." You know, these are people in need. Nobody's claiming that the benefit system is giving it away. Tells you something about the news priorities, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just doesn't fit into the broader narrative, which is trying to demonise the benefit system and welfare claimants in general. But I just want to come back to a point you made before. I mean, there are a couple of things that you seem to be saying. If you're saying that we need to reduce taxes on the poorest in society, I agree, excellent. But if you're saying that the way to help the poor is actually to take benefits away from them, it seems a very odd argument to me. And when it comes to actually the question of raising revenues to cover debt for the government, there are so many other ways. If it's really about money, the government would be going, all out to get the 70 billion that's lost in tax evasion and the 25 additional billion which is lost in tax avoidance. They'd been taxing carbon, which would raise billions. They'd introduce a financial transaction tax to raise billions. This is not about money. This is ideological, and it's about funneling cash from the bottom of society to the top. And it's been going on for 30 years, and that's a neoliberal political project.
So why is it? So it's ideological to want to have poor people paying less tax and to have a smaller size of government. But why is it not ideological then to want a larger size of government? Then it's exactly equivalent. But things like the French tax, things like tax on carbon. These are taxes on people on lower incomes. A carbon tax would make energy even higher, energy prices even higher than it is, and that affects people on lower incomes in pensioners much more than most of the taxes.
It's an essential move.
Let me just stand back from this debate again, because I mean there's an interesting thing going on here, and I want to ask you all about it. You see, there's a sort of kind of new conservative with a small c argument which goes that any problem that exists in society, smaller government and more of the market will solve it. Do you think? I mean, I'm just talking politically now. Do you think that after sort of whatever it is, a generation of neoliberal economic policy, that argument is really going to run?
Well, I think if you look at, I think there's the ICM poll and the Ipsos Mori polls of younger people. In fact, younger people are themselves less trustworthy of a big state. They see a welfare system which has failed. They see large taxes which they're not supportive of. They see even of institutions like state education. They're very supportive of free schools, of having greater sort of...
Okay, so you're saying there's a sort of popular base for more conservatism. Steve, I mean, the polls don't seem to indicate that. I mean, the Tory party have been flatlining on 32% in the polls for more than a year now. But isn't the trouble with the opposition that it's at least half, if not three-quarters, bought into this frame of mind?
It's interesting. Last week, Ed Miliband was talking, and he rejected the period of New Labour. He was very clear that we made major mistakes in that, but he hasn't yet started to elicit what the conclusions are. This weekend was fascinating because on the one hand you've got the debate about Benefit Street, but on the other hand, in tragic circumstances in Edinburgh and Kirkcaldy, you had the community, a working class community, collectively trying to look for that poor child. They all came out, everybody came out, and they talked about the sense of community. And it's that community, collective endeavour, that is about how we solve our problems. The state, that's what the state is. It's our collective endeavour, democratically determined. We've done it before. In 1945, our movement, our broad movement, the labour movement, decided they were going to deal with poverty, deal with this housing crisis. And I think we're getting, again, into a mood where we want to collectively address poverty, address housing crisis. Now, can Ed Miliband and Labour really learn the lesson of the past? I think possibly they can. They're beginning to. And I think as the polls move on, because the polls say that young people are fed up to the back teeth with the Tories and the Lib Dems. They're not supporting them electorally. And I think the sense of a new future, a new mood where collectively we all win again is possible.
Well, what do you think? Do you think that's true, or do you think that all the political elite have been so sort of have imbibed so thoroughly the neoliberal doctrine that there's a kind of political dissatisfaction going on with the elite?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Russell Brand got it right the other night on Newsnight when he said we have a very corrupt political system. We have the Labour Party, Lib Dems, Conservatives. They're various wings of a business party. They all subscribe to neoliberalism. And we've seen over the last 30 years that this has resulted in increasing inequality, wealth being concentrated at the top of society. And that's what led to the crash ultimately, because people weren't earning enough to actually go out and buy things. And it was just fueled by debt, which created a large bubble, which actually crashed. The housing market crashed. And the so-called recovery that's taken place since then is the same thing happening again. Yeah,
well, let me just talk about that. I mean, are you not worried? I mean, because the quite right-wing commentators are now worried that they're recreating a housing bubble and a debt bubble.
Well, in terms of the debt bubble, and that's certainly a concern, and we've had sort of a level of monetary policy which has been excessively loose, simply unprecedented. So when you have interest rates at 0.5% for 6 or 5 years, and so that's a concern. That's leading to problems in asset markets, and leading to, and you look at consumer debt as well, which is a serious problem. So that's a concern. But if essentially productivity growth is the answer to economic growth, and the government really should be focusing more on that.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to stop the conversation there. I'd like to thank all my guests in the studio for participating in that debate about Benefit Street and the situation with welfare spending in this country. Do rejoin us in future editions of Analysis, where we'll be looking more at government economic policy and its impact on working people in this country. Thanks for watching.